Right. So we invited Sean Morrisey, a fifth grade teacher at the Pinehurst Elementary School, who has been using ReadBasix. And he'll tell us a little more about his experience using it with his students.
Okay. Yevgen, you can keep this. Hi, Yevgen. You can keep this slide up. So hi, everyone. Okay. So a little bit about my background. I've been working in the schools for a little bit over 20 years. I first started off as a school psychologist for about 7 or 8. Had a passion to actually teach reading. So that's why I made the switch. So I've been in the classroom for almost 15 years now. A variety of different grade levels, 1st, 4th, 5th. I have worked at the middle school for our participants here that are middle school or even high school. I've worked at a middle school as a psychologist for quite a few years as well. So as a teacher, kind of what I'm looking for a diagnostic assessment is like, I want something that's pretty efficient. However, I want something that actually looks at foundational skills. So when I'm thinking about like reading comprehension, sometimes we think about reading comprehension, it's either like kind of the simple view of reading where, oh, it's a decoding problem or a comprehension problem. But you have to really get into kind of the weeds on why is a student not comprehending the text. And when Yevgen and John were talking about like sometimes reading comprehension tests, the kids will be all over the place where they'll go up on one test, the next one they'll go down. And it's partly that's just a factor of a reading comprehension subtest where, you know, one test they might have had more background knowledge for than another. So they're going to do better on the one that they had background knowledge for. So when I look at a diagnostic assessment that's truly a diagnostic assessment, I'm looking at the skills right like that you see on your computer screen. So I want to know word decoding skills, especially in late elementary and middle school. How are students' word decoding skills? If kids aren't comprehending, why? Is it word recognition? Is it reading efficiency, like silent reading efficiency? Are they silently reading quick enough so that their memory isn't impacting their comprehension? But also on the language side, vocabulary and morphology, are those the weaknesses? So I want an assessment that my students can take to look at all of those different foundational skills, kind of to determine, okay, if there are weaknesses, where are the weaknesses? So then in some way we have to address those weaknesses. So this is why when I met Yevgen and I found ReadBasix, I was super excited. I've had many opportunities with almost every assessment out there, whether in my classroom or other places, to see the assessments in action. And I'm really, really happy with ReadBasix. I think it's kind of a natural progression. So when we think about like early literacy, we really are testing phonemic awareness, phonics, like beginning oral reading fluency. I think those early measures, you know, you have like Dibbles, Ames Web, those kind of things. They do a good job looking at those early literacy, especially in kind of the decoding realm. But as kids get older, you know, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade middle school, what's exactly out there for assessments? And generally the assessments out there, they're reading comprehension, just general tests that will like correlate with state assessments, but aren't necessarily telling you like, what do these students have to work on? So I think this is kind of a natural progression from those early literacy measures, which I like. So John was mentioning about the decoding threshold, and this is really really interesting. So this is my actual students. So this is actual data. Now these numbers are absolute scores. So it's not like they're depending on how old the students are and what grade level. So if you look at the first column on the left, word recognition and decoding. So once students get to 240, they're kind of past that decoding threshold, as John said, that then they're decoding strong enough where their comprehension will improve. But if you notice, I have students here from student 6 to 34 that is below the decoding threshold. What's really interesting is this is the only assessment that, and my students and in my district, we use other assessments as well that are mandated. If you look at student number 22, which is the fifth one down here, the decoding threshold was 227 for this student. This is the only assessment that picked up weaknesses in reading. Besides for what I saw in the classroom, I kind of noticed with spelling and different things in the classroom. But this picked up her weakness. And this student's weakness is spelling, but it's also reading multisyllabic words. So even like Ames Web or an oral reading fluency measure, she fell in kind of an okay range, a typical range, because there's not a ton of harder academic multisyllabic words in those oral reading fluency passages. Well, as she gets older in middle school, when science and social become super important, and the morphology, knowing prefixes, suffixes in those content areas are really important, she's not going to improve. So what I was able to do now is look at this data, along with some spelling things that I've done in the classroom. But now I'm using an intervention. I'm going to be using I'm using the rewards program with her to help build and strengthen how to decode multisyllabic words. So this really picked it up for that student, which no other assessment did. So when you look at the top, of all of these, those basically 6 subtests, generally, like, you can really figure out where the student's weaknesses are, and then if you do have to intervene, it's going to be different for some students. So I have some students that I have to intervene more with word decoding, versus other students, it's more of a language issue, like vocabulary or morphology. So when we do some interventions, that's more tailored. Sometimes the issues with schools, as the participants probably know, is kids who struggle, they get just kind of thrown in like an AIS class, but the weaknesses, what the kids need to improve on, may be completely different. And if they're getting the same instruction, some students may improve, but some may not. The sentence processing subtest is super interesting to me, because it's one of the first subtests I've seen out there where for like English language learners, like that syntax where lots of our students new to English will struggle, that measures it pretty well. So and the morphology subtest does as well. So for those English language learners, I think you can actually use those subtests as to see, are they picking up the English language better? Because it's looking at a lot of syntax, where most reading tests, almost all of them, don't really look at kind of a syntax subtest. So like if we look, I guess in general though, like time taken. So I've actually went back to the data to look at how long the whole battery takes with my 5th graders. It's a low of about 30 minutes to a high of about just over 50. So it's actually not too long. It may be longer than like a STAR assessment, but the STAR assessment is 34 items, and it's really just measuring like general reading comprehension skills, and even like asking like questions like author's purpose. It's not asking any foundational like skills at all, except for maybe a little bit of vocabulary. So between 30 and about 55 minutes kind of total. So in my 5th graders, their attention was pretty strong throughout the assessment. So I think the length of it compared to some other measures, I think it's long enough to give you really good diagnostic information, yet it's not too long. The district that I work in, our mandated measure is iReady, which I like just for my 5th graders, iReady on average takes longer, probably an average about 15 minutes longer, or even maybe a little longer than 20 minutes longer per student. And the difference of information is honestly pretty drastic. If students on iReady have a lower score, they're just measuring general comprehension skills, and they have a vocabulary subtest. Well, it's not measuring word decoding. It's not measuring syntax and things like that. So it's not as diagnostic. Like the iReady does have some like phonics subtests, but it's the ceiling. Kids max out very young. So basically all the fifth graders in my building have a max score on the decoding subtests on iReady. So we really can't figure out which students are having decoding issues in fifth grade. Maybe in first or second you can, but definitely not for fifth. So I'll just bring down, I'll just show you. So this is kind of the general platform here. I'm gonna pick up one student here. Here's one student that was having some I would say decoding and reading fluency issues. We're reading fluency, especially at the start of the year. So if you notice the reading efficiency subtest, the first half of the year, the student went up tremendously. I put a bunch of reading, I think reading fluency sort of interventions class-wide in my classroom. Like when I teach social and science, we do a bunch of repeated readings to try to get that academic content fluently, reading it. So this student really went up. So here's just like one chart. So here's the word recognition decoding. So at first, this student was just at that line of is this student's comprehension going to go up? So we really needed the word decoding to go up first before we're going to see lots of those reading comprehension skills go up. And obviously you can see by the graph, we've had really, really good improvement there. The same thing if I go down to reading efficiency. So here's the improvement there, huge improvement. What's really nice is over the past, I would say 6 weeks to 8 weeks, I've seen a huge improvement in understanding what he reads. So like the assessment for this student was truly spot on. So once he got his fluency rate up, once he got his decoding up well enough, the comprehension now is taking off, and it's the first time, you know, I've kind of seen it probably in the last 6 to 8 weeks. Okay. So I mean, overall, like what I just look at for assessment, I wanted to look at all of those foundational skills. So going back here, I want to look at word decoding, word efficiency, looking at syntax, and that's going to just help me as a teacher to like then figure out what kind of intervention that I'm going to do or our building is going to do. You know, and looking at the data, I think people might laugh at this. We do so much looking at data, and then we're looking for hours and hours, but what are we actually doing with it? To me, it's really easy to look at this data, make a quick plan. So you're not losing instructional time, like spending hours and hours over the data or hours and hours of testing. Then you could actually teach, because personally, I hate losing instructional time. So I've seen really, really good success with using this year with my students. I think it's been a big help.
Sean, it's Brian. We've had a question from the audience. How did your students feel about the test and the UI? Were they comfortable with it? Did you have any problems it being a digital assessment, or were your students totally fine?
No, my students for fifth graders were totally fine. Now my students are used to like digital assessments, but I think that they did. I mean, with a new one, so because sometimes the first time you administer like a new test, like sometimes you get issues, but even with the first administration, it was perfectly fine. What's nice with this assessment is I could, out of those 6 subtests, I could break it up. So like I could do word decoding, vocabulary, and morphology. So if I didn't want to lose too much instructional time for a day, like those 3 subtests may take between 15 and 20 minutes. So I assign them those 3 subtests. Once they're done with those 3, then we could just move on with, you know, maybe a shortened lesson for the day, but we didn't lose like a whole day of a lesson, which was nice.